Ches Mishnah Hey. Adama is clay, earth. The Bartanura says it's a type of red clay. K'choisem hamar tzufin. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. The amount that you would be chayav for Hitzah on Shabbos is the amount of red clay used for a seal for Mar Tzufin. What are Mar Tzufin? So the Bartanura says, Sakin gedoilin, they're large bags, shenoisin bohem prakmatia, which would be used to carry merchandise. But sfinos, when a person would be a merchant and travel by ship, by boat, he would take his trade, his merchandise, in these large sort of bags, pouches. Rashi says it's made out of leather, or whatever it's made out of. And you would seal them in the same way that you would seal a letter. So, for example, you'd sort of take the pouch and this big leather bag, and you'd fold it over, and then you'd make some sort of sheath around it, some sort of ribbon or something around it, and then you would seal it with this red clay. So the amount of clay used to seal this big leather merchandise bag, that's how much you'd be chayav for Hitzah on Shabbos. Divrei Rabbi Akiva, these are the words of Rabbi Akiva. It's actually a much smaller share. It's the amount of clay used to seal a letter. So imagine you've got a letter. In those days, of course, it was like a scroll, a parchment, which you'd roll up, and then you'd tie something around it, and then you would seal it with this red clay. So that amount of clay needed to seal a letter, you'd be chayav for if you carry it on Shabbos. Zevel v'choil hadak. Zevel is manure. V'choil hadak is a fine sand. How much of that would you be chayav to carry chayav v'chatos if you carry b'shogeg on Shabbos? Kadei lezabel kelach shel kruv de Rabbi Akiva. Enough to fertilize a cabbage stalk. The amount of manure, the amount of fine sand you would use to fertilize a cabbage stalk, that's how much you'd be chayav for on Shabbos. V'chachomim oimrim kadei lezabel kreisha. It's enough to the amount you would use to fertilize a kreisha, a leek. And the Bartanura says again that the shear of the Chachomim is smaller than the shear of the Rabbi Akiva, and in both cases the halacha is like the Chachomim. The smaller shear is the halacha. Continues the Mishnah. Choil hagas, which is a thicker sand, kadei litain al meloi kaf sid. That is the amount used to put on a trowel of a person who would lime a house. In those days, they would sort of plaster the house on the outside with a limestone, which would give a nice bright white colour. But they would add some sand to it. Two reasons perhaps why they would add the sand. The article Mishnah says that they would add sand because although on one hand it diminishes the whiteness of the plaster, but on the other hand it has the benefit that it strengthens the structure more than pure plaster. So therefore they would add sand to it. So the amount that the limestone plasterer would put on his trowel, that amount would be chayav for on Shabbos. Alternatively, Rashi in the Gemara and Shabbos pay on the base says that it's a sort of a form of zeichel lechurban. As I mentioned, if you'd limestone your house, it would be very white and it would be very attractive. As a zeichel lechurban, to diminish the whiteness of the limestone, you would add some sand to it. You'd add some of this earth, so that it shouldn't be so bright and so appealing. Continues the Mishnah. Koneh, a reed, kedei lasos kulmus. The amount you'd be chayav for Hitzah on Shabbos is the amount of a reed that you'd use as a kulmus, which is a pen. You'd use it as some sort of quill, and you'd have a reed, and you'd form a nib at the top. You'd make it pointed, and then you'd have a pen. And the Mefarshim explain that it's a pen which goes up to the middle joint of the knuckles. Imagine if you take a quill, this reed, and you form a pen out of it. It doesn't have to be a very long one. It can be as long as, imagine if you're writing, it would go from there up to the middle knuckle of the finger. So about that sort of amount that a person would use that as a pen. If, however, the pen was the reed was much thicker, it was crushed, it was broken, and either way, therefore, it was inappropriate to use as a pen. If it was so thick, then the hollow inside would contain a lot of oil, and it would a lot of ink, and therefore it would smudge. So therefore, it's not appropriate to be used as a pen. And of course, if it's marusas, if it's crushed, then it's not going to hold any ink. So if it's not appropriate to be used as a pen, as a quill, then its function is going to be for firewood. So how much of a reed would you be chayav for carrying on Shabbos? That it would be the amount of reed needed to cook an egg. And which type of egg? A beitza kalish of a beitzim, the lightest type of egg. The Bartenura explains that is referring to beitza tarnagoles, the chicken's egg, because that cooks the quickest. Furthermore, the Bartenura says, "V'maikor lo beitza kala, shekala lehizbashal yosim misha beitzim." It cooks quicker than all other eggs. And how much of that egg are you going to cook? Says the Bartenura, "V'hashirhu kadei levashal k'gregaris mimeno." You have to cook the whole egg. So long as you cook a gregaris, i.e. the amount of a dried fig worth of egg, then so long as it cooks that amount, that's how much of the reed you're going to be chayav for. And furthermore, it's got to be trufa and a sunnah be'ilfus, which means, trufa means that the egg is already mixed with oil. The Bartenura explains, trufa b'shemen, mureves b'shemen, it's already mixed with oil, because if the egg is, you've broken it, you've cracked it, and you've whisked it with oil, and then you cook it, it cooks much faster. Furthermore, on a sunnah be'ilfus, and it's already been placed in the ilfus, i.e. you've heated up the frying pan beforehand, because if you heat up the frying pan and it's hot and then you add the egg, it will cook much more quickly than if you actually just place the egg in it and then you heat it up, then it will cook much more slowly. So in other words, the koneh, to summarize, if it's a thin one, then it's the shear used for a quill, which is from the writing paper, imagine this is the writing paper, up to the middle knuckle, so that sort of amount. Alternatively, if it's thicker or if it's crushed, then it's the amount of reed used to heat to be able to cook an egg. And what type of egg? A chicken's egg, in a situation where it's going to cook as quickly as possible, i.e. that the egg has already been whisked and mixed with oil, plus the actual frying pan has already been preheated. So the amount of reed needed to cook to cook an egg in such a fashion. That is the end of Perek Ches Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Hey. End of Mishnah Hey.